Welcome to my very first Age of Wonders 4 mod spotlight. In this video, we're taking a look at Age of Tomes, created by ERICdb. This is the Tome of Astrology update for Age of Wonders 4. And as I create a faction in the background to make the most of it, let's take a look quickly at what it delivers. Here's its Steam page, as you can see. Of course, you can subscribe, download the mod straight into Age of Wonders 4. What it adds are 5 new tomes of magic, and they're pretty spicy ones. We have the Tome of Astrology at Tier 1. Don't worry, we'll go through what they do soon. The Tome of Tides also rolls through, and completing the Tier 1 selection, we have the Tome of Witchcraft. At Tier 2, we have a pair, the Tome of the Seelie and the Unseelie. And you will have noticed that all of them provide a lot of interesting effects, including 2 different affinities. Future plans for the mods are all about the early game, focusing on the first 3 tiers. And it is, of course, a work in progress, a wonderful labor of love, if I don't say so myself. And if you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing. We are getting actually frightfully close to 60,000 subscribers. Now let's jump in and take a look, shine a spotlight on this mod. And of course, the beauty of it is that we get to engage with it right from the start, because it adds, of course, 3 Tier 1 tomes of magic. Here, in this case, I'm going to start with Tome of the Tides. I think it's a nice pick. I think also, though, that Witchcraft and equally the Astral Tome, Astrology, add some pretty powerful effects. All of them, for example, adding a really nice unit that we can train up, in this case a support unit, and either a mixture of aggressive spells or some race transformations. And of course, in this video, I'm going to show them all off, but having some race transformations unlocked very early on in Tier 1 or Tier 2 is potentially really strong. It can turn the tide in early battles, like this aligned ability here. All of it comes together to create both a cohesive strategy, i.e. there's a lot of internal synergy, but also there's some independently good effects here that can be mix and matched with a lot of different things. So as I finish the customization of my beautiful faction, let me jump in and show you a few of the highlights of all 5 tomes and how they came together a little bit for me in this game. Starting off, of course, I went with that wonderful tome of Tsunamis of Tides. It unlocks a lesser elemental unit, a Tide elemental, which I'm quite a fan of. But more broadly, it also gives me this Tide Cooler, a unit that I can train right from the beginning of the game. As I mentioned at the start of the video, this is quite important across all 3 tomes because you actually get some reasonable power that doesn't rely on mana. Of course, if you would like to rely on mana for your upkeep, a reminder, a whopping 8 mana upkeep on these early Tide units, you can do just that. In my experience, this first Tome of Magic, the Tome of Tides, was very useful for early combat. It provided me with this Cold Mist spell, able to unlock and cast because it was super cheap very early on. Effectively here, we're looking at Zone of Control. We're looking at debuffing the enemy with some interesting debuffs like Wet, Cold Mist, all of that stuff playing out. And then I'm combining that with some pretty strong units. And I love a Tome of Magic that unlocks a unit. One of the few reasons why I might even reach into the Order Tome when I have nothing else to do with it, purely because of those beautiful archers that you can get. And of course, it all comes together to support really nicely, keeping my own units alive and dealing a lot of aggressive damage against them. A beautiful tome, but of course it's not alone. There are 4 more to get through. Let's pick up the pace a little bit and take a look at the rest. Moving through for my second pick, I decided to go with the Tome of Astrology. Fits really well with the spells. This tome again unlocks an early unit, but its shining grace for me was the minor race transformation, giving me extra alignment and the aligned buff. I chose to combine that by training up a few astrologers here. They combine really well with the alignment too, adding extra morale and a base critical hit chance. Both of those things, by the way, affect your chance of getting a critical hit. So what I end up with is an army of critical hitters who are also very enchanted. Here you can see a unit enchantment flow style makes it almost certain that we make the enemy wet and we become slippery ourselves. No laughing in the back. I can hear you. Cut it out. It's really strong. A powerful synergy that removes the negative benefits of wet but applies them to the enemy. And it stacks. Combine that with the race transformation, a wonderful race transformation at the beginning of the game, and you can really lean into the astral affinity and then use these aggressive enemy army spells like this totally unnecessary tsunami here. It casts a great bit of damage on potentially an enemy looking to hold a besieged city. You shouldn't have any trouble rolling over your opponents with this initial tide, and particularly, of course, the combination of adding those tides with astrology. The final piece of the puzzle is witchcraft. Now, to me, it didn't fit quite as well with the synergy that I was going with the other two, but as a standalone tome, and of course, because it stretches nature and shadow, potentially a very powerful tome early on, I think it unlocks some pretty sweet abilities. The Witch Coven was a reasonable improvement. Of course, there's the witch herself, a nice unit to train. But here again, there's something particularly spicy outside of the army damages and debuffs, and that's the Occult Accord. I almost said Discord. Occult Accord adds 20% extra damage. But of course, there is a trade-off, like with any 20% extra damage at tier 1. In this case, we're not changing the form of our army, but instead we're losing some of our status resistance. And at a -2, that is a pretty significant trade-off. However, as we move through to tier 2, things continue along that spicy train. All of these tomes, of course, reach into 2 different affinities. In this case, shadow and chaos. It leans into the chaos, that kind of revelry, messing with the opponent's morale, debuffing them, but it also builds on some really interesting fairy units and some different debuffs that go along with those. These units, of course, would traditionally be kind of ring-fenced behind the Rally of Lieges mechanic, potentially getting them from city-states, ancient wonders, whatever it may be. In this case, though, we can grab them, and we can grab them at tier 2. They are, of course, a slightly better unit than most of the tier 2 pickups, and so again, there's an opportunity here to creep ahead a little bit in terms of the units that we can train. And as we move back through, pick up a few different attunements, enchantments, you'll start to see the impacts layer upon layer upon layer, and of course, check out that beautiful boy in the background, because don't forget, our lesser spirits from the start can level up and literally change their form as we move through and pick up some experience from them. So getting some experience leaders might be a good shout. The final tome of magic that's unlocked at the moment inside of this mod is Tome of the Seelie, the opposite. This one focusing instead on buffing instead of debuffing, and also it has a focus around binding, and of course kind of leans into the nature affinity as well. Naturally, I mean, look at it. It's a giant green tome with a flower on the front. So again, this one perhaps more aligned with the Tome of Witchcraft that we saw at the start, and a nature build. However, again, I didn't struggle to pull them together. In this case, we also get access, by the way, to the other 2 fairies. So a wonderful way to unlock the entire fairy army. In my case, though, I'm more interested in the combat spells, because I've gone for a build that tended to focus a little bit more around combat, around throwing debuffs at the enemy like literal tsunami waves that we unlocked in tier 1 to weaken them down, and then using an army of ice spirits who are wet. They are slippery, but seriously, they combine a lot of debuff potential together. In many ways, it kind of reminds me of what a traditional nature build might do, right? With lots of healing, vines getting in the way, debuffs, but none of that extra summoning units, token units, animals. No. All of that moved to one side. And instead we focused in almost a very much Avatar, the Legend of Aang kind of way, starting with Tomes of the Tides, using the water and the elements to our favor. And then, of course, we moved through into things like astrology and witchcraft to grab all of those early race transformations. What we ended up with was quite an interesting army, quite an interesting build. A build focused around destroying the enemy, as I say, around lifting ourselves up, but also, crucially, around keeping the army together and striking down just a rain of debuffs. I really enjoyed this build, but I don't think it's the only one on offer. Of course, in this video, I focused on trying to pick up every single tome that I could from this mod pack. But I think the real strength will come from having this in your back pocket, because you can add, in theory, as many mods as you like, so long as they're compatible with one another. And picking up just 1 or 2 tomes out of the 5 tomes of magic that were on offer that you can see, I think could add a lot of diversity to gameplay. Not just because of the way that the mod maker has really put a clever effort into ensuring that there are strong synergies within the tomes, but also the fact that, at the moment, as I probably don't need to tell you, most tomes of magic in Age of Wonders 4 don't give us access to multiple affinities. This mod gives us 5 tomes, and 4 of them stretch across. Tome of Unseelie, for example, giving shadow and chaos, and that's just one. And I think that that's another strength that I perhaps haven't focused on as much, instead focusing on my combat supremacy. As you can see, you cannot beat this Wizard King. But moreover, I think that flexibility and that diversity is something that not just this mod, but many more could offer. Let me know below if you have any suggestions for future mod spotlights. I love shining a light on some really creative community content, and this, my friends, was a shining example of that. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you in the next one.